Welcome to Pulling the Threads podcast. Thank you for tuning in to the second part of this two-part series where David LeBlanc interviews me. You can learn more about my story, so tune in for this. And make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on Spotify. Join the Facebook group and join the discussion at JesusTheJewWithinJudaism.com. Make sure you subscribe for all the updates and new upcoming shows. And make sure you post your feedback and comments about this after viewing this episode. Looking at things within the text.
Credit, yeah. So you're pressing forward. So you already mentioned that part of your decision was because of your dad, and just the fact that he didn't want to pay for your schooling. That's probably a big factor. But that aside, let's put that aside. You chose from a secular professional educational track, you went towards a religious one, but you've already explained how you feel like you need to fix something, right? You feel like there's something you need to get closure, and you need to overcome some of what you've been through and some of what you're feeling, and you feel like this is a path where you're going to find a sense of wholeness and satisfaction, and that if you can just pursue the knowledge, right? That you know that you're a critical thinker. You're probably at this point in your life in your young 20s, you're probably not giving yourself enough credit for being a critical thinker. You probably just feel like, why am I always at odds with people with these questions I have? But yet you're pressing because you feel like at the end of this process, you're going to feel peace, wholeness, and some sense of closure to the pain you've experienced. And you feel like that this path is a better path for you than that professional path that maybe doesn't have that element to it, even though it might be more financially prosperous. It's not going to fit that deeper need that you have. And so I'm projecting here a little bit, and if I'm off a little bit, please correct me. But I feel like I really resonate with what you're talking about, because I feel like I had the same journey. And there's this drive that we have, right? That we just feel like we have to know. Like there's something that needs to be uncovered, and if we can keep looking at it, we're going to find it, and it's going to answer the question that's the deepest question in our heart, and then we're going to feel at peace. And so we already started this interview where you feel very comfortable with where you're at right now, and you've had to go through a lot to get there. But this is a really important point in your life where you're in your young 20s, and you're looking at going into ministry at this point. They're pushing you into this, that you're going to serve ultimately on the mission field and all this other stuff. And even at this very juncture, you're already like having issues with what they're trying to teach you.
Yeah.
Did I overstate some of that, or would you say that that's accurate?
I mean, yes, think I'm following God by the information that I've been led to believe. Right. Pressing forward with something. See, back to like what I was saying though, like when I was a child and I would walk and clear my head and kind of pray and process things.
It was simple. Yeah.
It was a simple thing, but it gave me peace. And, later in life, similarly mindfulness and, meditative practices that come from like Musar and stuff have helped with the same kind of thing. And I try to be very mindful, to be present in the moment and not worried about the future or the past and whatnot. Very simple thing, but I mean, it centers, it grounds you. But at the time, I was trying to find peace, trying to deal with why bad things happen to good people, why all this stuff happened to me. Looking for a healing God. But to be honest with you, the answers that I sought weren't in religion or Christianity at all. I was diagnosed with PTSD from the abuse that I experienced. And, I had to start taking, medication and going to counseling and stuff like that. And starting to grapple with the mental health issues. It was about that time because I was at Bible college. Was having emotional difficulties with roommates that had their own personal trauma that they kind of let out on people. And so, yeah, I'm not going to get too off in the weeds on that one.
No. I understand. I apologize if I kind of derailed you a little bit, but I just felt it was a really important point of your journey, you know, where you were at emotionally at that time.
Yeah.
So,
I was vulnerable for sure, and looking for, looking for peace, looking for happiness, looking for healing, wanting to be a good person who gives good to this world versus
mhm,
harm.
yeah,
Trying to be conscientious, but really at that point is where I started taking my mental health seriously, and you
interesting.
know, years of counseling to work through all the trauma to the point where I feel like I'm able to help people, and it's probably why I have a more balanced view of things, and
Yeah,
compassion for others, all the stuff I've been through. I mean, if you're aware of your own pain, how can you not be considerate of other people in difficult times,
yeah. Like we talked about earlier, pain brings empathy. So, so from there, so you're in Bible college, and again, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze you here. I'm just trying to help you bring forth some really relevant stuff for the audience. Um, so at some point, you ended up in the mission field, right? From this experience.
So yeah, immediately afterwards, I did like a 2-month mission trip. I was involved. I got involved with a young adult ministry in the Assemblies of God, and I was leading a small group. Um, and then I was doing some mission work and stuff here and there. Um, and I'm trying to think. Somewhere in there, I met my ex. Um, Kind of in that time frame there.
So she
And
was
then
involved
I
with some.
started to get in Christian rap music at that time also. Was that?
Okay, I said so. You met your wife through Assemblies of God.
No, I met my wife through a friend who I was training for a Tough Man Championship. She was
Oh, okay.
she was a coworker of his.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Well, I just assumed. Yeah. Okay.
um, but yeah, no. So I didn't actually meet her through the religious thing, but her mom was strong Southern Baptist. I think they went to Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship or something like that. Um, but yeah, so I mean, I was involved in lay ministry.
Hmm.
Um, I hadn't got, I didn't go into full-time ministry. I had ethical questions and concerns about the ministry from what I seen behind the scenes. Um, the business of looking at it as a spiritual endeavor, the business of it, a lot of it just didn't rub right with me. So I never committed to the full-time ministry. But yeah,
Because
so I
for that
started.
reason.
Was that?
So you had potential opportunities, but you just were unsettled about it.
Yeah, and I wasn't so convinced of the dogmatic theological statements and the views, and I still, when I preached, was very Tanakh, very Hebrew scriptures oriented. Like a majority of everything I said, um, and for a while there, it was definitely affected by the revival stuff that was going on, where they had an emphasis on the tabernacle and the festivals and stuff like that from a totally Christian Jesus is everything perspective. So given it's not where it ended up, but everything that I did kind of had a flavor of the Tanakh, the Hebrew to it. So I hadn't fully went Messianic yet. When I was in Bible college, I had went to like a couple Messianic, things here and there. Um, but yeah, so I get, meet my wife, we get engaged. I have this idea in my head. It's like I want to raise my kids Jewish. And I was just thinking
When
of
do you
just,
think that idea just started to come up in your mind?
I don't know. It's interesting because it did come to my mind, and it was just I want to raise my kids
So at
Jewish.
some point, you just had this idea that you.
Well, okay, so part of it is this. part of it is this. I wanted to give my kids a culture and a tradition. Being raised Jehovah's Witness, where you don't have birthdays and holidays and stuff like that. I want to give my kids a culture and tradition that's meaningful, that they have memories together. Because when you don't do things with family together for the holidays or like Thanksgiving or any of that kind of stuff, because the devil had something to do with people getting together and enjoying themselves. Don't understand, how the devil wants families not to
No,
connect with each other and bond.
obviously a bad thing. Yeah. No
The devil's in families bonding. I wanted to give my kids
Yeah.
a tradition and a culture, and it's the one that made sense to me. It's the one I had the least problems with. Um,
Right.
And so I'm like, this is what I want to give my kids. I have a lot less questions about this than I have about other stuff. But and that was the thought. And then I'm like, well, and trying to get her there. Um, we ended up settling on a Messianic synagogue because it was a lot easier. We had started couples therapy at a Covenant Church in Carrollton, Texas.
You have children at this point?
No, no.
Okay.
This was pre-marriage.
Gotcha.
Because like my marriage is what brought me to Messianic Judaism, getting married, because we had a Messianic Jewish wedding, which was a compromise and felt weird, but it did feel a bit appropriatory. Like it wasn't. I had questions, but in so we started out at Covenant Church, and the discipleship for pre-marriage, it was very controlling, very, I don't know, intrusive. It didn't feel appropriate. And then I was like, all right, we need to do something different. And that's when we got involved with Baruch Hashem, the Messianic synagogue there. And it was one of those Torah observant Messianic synagogues.
I'm familiar with some people that are part of it. Yeah.
Huh?
I've had relations with people that were part of that synagogue.
They were very, the Jews, read the Torah portions. Gentiles have a different place. They can't necessarily be they did have a associate Gentile rabbi, but he didn't do, he never, he would not take on the role that like Jews play. So there was like a second class citizenship thing to it that was it wasn't clear, because it's not like in a Jewish synagogue where Gentiles can come, you're either Jew or not Jew, but if you want to become a Jew, like you could convert. I mean, you could be a Noahide. It's a clear, very simple process. It was very convoluted. I'm already at a place that, for me, the Tanakh was the foundation. The New Testament was supposed to be laid upon. And if anything is to happen, like, Christians should get back to that foundation, is where my mind was. As I'm in it, there was just a lot of questions. But in the beginning, it was a strange place to be. I did get to learn some of the Jewish traditions, and like the Shema and Ve'afta et Adonai, like the Ve'afta after the Shema. Like, you start learning some of the liturgy and stuff. And so that was good exposure. It wasn't a full synagogue, though. It was
right.
And I started going to like the JCC there and stuff sometimes. And
let me ask you a question, because it's different. I'm very, very, very familiar with the Messianic Jewish movement, and there are some Messianic Jewish synagogues that openly discourage conversion to Judaism because they don't want to lose their congregants, because they know if you start going to a Jewish shul, you're probably going to leave Jesus, you're probably going to convert. That's really their fear. But they also emphasize, like you mentioned this word convoluted, there's a real tension between people that came up through the Hebrew roots movement and embraced the one law position versus groups that acknowledge the distinction between Jews and non-Jews, and the obligations to Torah that each group has according to that. So the Baruch Hashem, would they have fallen within the one law concept, or would they have been more of the distinction between Jews and non-Jews?
The distinction between Jews and non-Jews.
Right. So they didn't expect you as a non-Jew to be fully Torah observant, but they were happy to have this. Right. Right.
I'm only saying that for the sake of the audience who doesn't understand what we're talking about. They kind of
Yep.
eschewed it. They kind of
Yep.
discouraged it actually.
Right.
They didn't offer a conversion for Gentiles who felt like the Torah was for them.
Hmm.
So it was kind of it was weird because I felt like the Torah was for me and I wanted to participate in the full Torah service. It was not a full Torah service. There was
Right.
Torah elements, but it was basically a church service with Torah elements.
Right.
Um, but the messages were still very full of Jesus and New Testament and Galatians, this and
What
Ephesians
was
that.
their what did their statement affirm the
I,
Trinity?
I think they were MJAA,
Okay.
Messianic Jewish Alliance of America, or whatever that one was, the MJAA.
Yeah,
I
the
think that's
MJAA does affirm the Trinity. Yeah.
yeah.
They have
So
a tortured relationship with it, but they do affirm it. And
yeah,
then the reason they affirm it primarily is they don't lose their Baptist funding.
yeah. You know what? I think they were MJAA or a UMJC, one of those two. But
Oh,
either way,
UMJC. Yeah, UMJC is definitely Trinitarian.
yeah, yeah. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it basically was a church that met on Saturday and did some
Right.
Jewish stuff.
Right.
Um, but I appreciated, the traditional Jewish portions.
What was the makeup,
So
would you say, of and this is my last question as you go on here, and this is just for the sake of the audience again, but what would you say the makeup percentage wise was of Baruch Hashem, the congregation you're part of that you got married in, between Jews and non-Jews? Like how many percentage of Jews versus non-Jews?
actual Jews,
Yeah.
I'd say at least 80% Gentiles. I don't even know if it was 20% Jews.
Right.
About five Jews in a congregation of a few hundred.
And they were probably in mixed marriages, right?
Yes, yes,
Correct.
mixed
Right.
marriages. Yes.
Right. Okay. No,
Uh,
just I'm only bringing that forth so that we don't leave the audience in the dark as to the kind of environment that you were in. But go
uh,
ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So halakhically, I would now question the status of some of the Jews, but I don't know. Like, yeah. Um, Nobody who is truly observant of Judaism, um, maybe unaffiliated Jews who came to Jesus,
Yep.
uh, who that were related, married to a Christian and wanted to have a Jewish Christian experience for their significant other would be my read, I guess. But nobody who is just like deeply authentically Jewish, maybe culturally Jewish, but wanted to have a Christian version of, I mean, like a Jewish version of Christianity. Um,
Yep.
so then
Right.
about this time, my wife, through her work, decides to move to California. We end up in Santa Maria, California, and we are involved in a small Messianic group there for about 2 years. And then um, Dr. Raymond Gannon, who was part of the Jewish Voice ministries, was looking to start a branch of King's Seminary in Phoenix, Arizona. And I forget what I was at, some Messianic conference. And he's talking to everybody. And I distinctly remember being talked to by him and invited to Phoenix to get involved in the startup of this Messianic yeshiva. So they called it.
Yep.
I question that status now, but
Yeah.
let's just give Jewish names to a Christian Bible college.
Mhm.
But so yeah, my family moved to Phoenix to get involved in the King's Seminary Jewish Voice Ministry. Um, Again, I always like kept running into like contradictions within the stuff that was being presented. So I never full on became, I did ministry here and there and missionary work. I never became like the head pastor of anything within that. At that time, though, I was working with the Assemblies of God, and I did start kind of the paperwork process to become ordained with the Assemblies of God. I had completed all my hours and this, that, and the other, and but
We should mention as an aside
yeah,
that a huge portion of the Messianic Jewish movement comes out of Assemblies of God. Assemblies of God as a denomination has always been at least mildly supportive
Yeah.
of these Hebraic elements, the blowing of the
Yeah.
shofar and all these different things. I've always kind of embraced that. And then you also have another whole element that comes out of the Southern Baptist movement.
Yes, that was the other one. I was gonna say Assemblies and Southern Baptist. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yep. So and I should also mention that while I'm talking and I'm interrupted you, the Jewish voice. So one of the things, and you don't have to address this now, but maybe as you continue to tell your story, we can discuss this a little bit. One of the things that I found shocking, for instance, I was enrolled in King's University. I was an online student from the Texas campus under Dr. David Rudolph, and had some correspondence with him. And of course, he wrote that book. I forget the title of it, but he wrote basically a Paul within Judaism book. And anyways, I ended up getting pushed out because I was non-Trinitarian by then. So I used to argue with people in the group chat in the class about. I used to argue about the bogusness of the Trinity, and so finally, one of my professors was like, "You do realize that King's University embraces the cardinal doctrines of the evangelical world, including the Trinity." And I said, "Well, that's kind of a." I remember saying that's really kind of a non-starter for me. How can you claim to be teaching a return to the Jewish roots of the faith, and yet you're embracing a doctrine that didn't exist in the church until the 4th, 5th century? And that was it stonewalled me, like it ended my education.
yeah.
And so you mentioned Kings, and that's why I mentioned that, because I'm like, wow, yeah, so Jewish Voice. When I was a Christian, I saw organizations like Jewish Voice and One for Israel and Jews for Jesus as doing a positive work of trying to reach Jews. And after converting to Judaism, I detested these organizations because of their subversive types of missionary work that they did. Anyways, I didn't mean to jump ahead of you, but
no, you're good. Well, yes, subversive. It was my interactions with Dr. Gannon. See, I already had like a suspicion of the ministry from everything I saw before Bible college. The intentional control tactics, the manipulation, the willful knowledge that you're intentionally manipulating people. I was aware of that kind of stuff. I naively thought maybe Messianic Judaism is somehow different. But there's all the infighting between the different groups and whatnot. But to see that they're really just functionally churches, and that everybody that ran them were just pastors. And there wasn't anything different between the Messianic synagogues and churches. They were churches with different names. I mean, the semantics was different, but it was the same. But really, like the pivotal moment for me was sitting in the office of Dr. Raymond Gannon at Jewish Voices Ministry, a Gentile who has no problem eating, a bacon cheeseburger. Talking about dressing up and wearing tzitzits in a Jewish community to try to convert, he said, to look more Orthodox than the Orthodox to convert Jews. And I'm just sitting here like, wow. Mind you, my studies, personal studies never ended. I'm reading the book Messianic Judaism by Rabbi Carol Shapiro, which refers to Gentiles dressing up as cross-dressing. And I'm like, well, he just said it. I mean, again, it's does a thing hold up against itself? And you're hearing outside criticism, and you're like, well, you made the case. Like, wow, okay. At that point, I was done with Messianic Judaism. I had started studying Hebrew at the Kollel. You
already have your foot in an authentic Jewish base at this point.
What's that?
Well, just I didn't mean you were about to say it, but so at the time that you're meeting with Dr. Gannon, you already have yourself somewhat within actual authentic Jewish space.
I mean,
so seeing the difference.
Yeah, I mean, I would, I think I had visited. Well, yeah, yeah, no, I had for a while. When we were in Santa Maria before moving to Phoenix, we went to Passover at Chabad. We went to Shabbat at Chabad. It was it was a wonderful, very small environment. They make the big meal and
Yeah.
very festive and all the
Oh yeah.
bracha and all the blessing, and it was a
Poland and
warm
everything. Yeah.
environment. I really liked the Shabbat meals and
Lots of
Passover
vodka.
at Chabad. So yeah, we had been to Chabad. So yes, and then but even when I was started with the Messianic movement in uh Dallas, we went to the JCC for various holidays and festivals. So I mean, I didn't have anything in my mind against crossing lines into just like straight Jewish space. I would go
Right.
into Jewish spaces and just it's cool.
Well, but
They're not worried.
you're personally, you're not going there hoping to convert them to Messianic Judaism. You're just going there to
No.
experience Jewish life. Right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
just
Yeah.
Passover, Shabbat, these things that
Right.
Messianics are talking about. I'm just going there like, okay, well, how do they do it? And
Right.
one, to do it the way they do it, and two, like see how it is without Jesus.
Right.
And
Right.
then
Exactly.
it's like then you start to see the inappropriate and misplacedness of Jesus being put in this stuff.
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother one. But yeah, so I mean, yes, I had never, yeah, even before I went to Bible college. You know what? I went to a Passover before I went to Bible college.
A Jewish Passover or an evangelical Passover?
I'm trying to, um, it was a synagogue meeting in a church because they lost their building.
Oh wow. Okay.
So it was an interesting space, and I probably felt safe because it was within a church building, but they had their Aram Kodesh and everything, and no, it was Jewish. So yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't track all my like
It couldn't
interactions.
have been Orthodox. It had to have been a
No, I
reform.
think it was
Yeah.
Reform. I think it was
Right.
Reform.
Because a reform would have no problem with that. The Orthodox would never do that.
Oh yeah, there's a woman rabbi, and so yeah.
Okay.
It
Gotcha. Right.
was it
Yeah.
was it.
Okay.
Um, and for being Christian, Reform is a very comfortable space. It's not too
Yeah. They don't care.
challenging.
They don't care. Yeah.
So um,
People don't
but
realize
yeah.
that, right?
So
Isn't
what's
that
that?
true? You and I, like we've experienced this, but we talk to Christians and a lot of people like that have interests in exploring Judaism. They don't realize that if you go to like a reform or even many cases a conservative shul, they don't care if you're
Mhm.
Christian. You don't have to hide it from them. Like they really don't care. They're happy to have you there and visit, and it's really not an issue. It's an issue for the Messianic Jewish congregations because they're trying to get you to be part of their space. The Jewish, like, yeah, you can come celebrate Shabbat with us. We'll have a
Yeah.
kiddush together. They don't care. They could care less.
Yeah, I
Right.
was I was a Gentile Messianic, and went to Chabad Passover and Shabbats, and no
No, yeah, they'll
one.
welcome you anytime. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like nothing. It was yeah,
As long as you don't try to proselytize.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, so yeah, about that time I started. I was going to the Kollel in Phoenix to learn Hebrew, and I took a course on Musar at the Jewish Learning
Yeah, you
Institute.
and I discussed that last time you talked to me. Yeah.
Um, and I was getting into like Hebrew, Jewish spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I guess I settled on the conservative movement as where I wanted to convert. We were going to the new shul in Scottsdale, and it's a Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach style minyan, so very spiritual davening.
Music and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very, it was very, very. I liked it a lot. Um, Also the Jewish catalog, Rabbi Strassfeld. So he came out of kind of a Reconstruction Jewish experience. So very eclectic, kind of pick your traditions, figure out how to make it work for you, make Judaism your own kind of thing. So it was very eclectic, very spiritual environment. So we started going to New Shul. I eventually approached the rabbi about going through conversion. That whole congregation went through a Musar thing, and it was kind of a Musar thing within the conservative movement. So it was more mindfulness, meditative, but definitely um, group meetings and your like individual, the Havaruda and stuff like that. It was
Yep.
It was a very spiritual experience. I liked it a lot. It helped me connect with it. It was definitely a good transition. I like the davening of the Karl Bach style minion. Um, it was a good experience. And then we're going through the conversion. Um, part of what got us to
This
that
is you,
point,
this is you and your wife, right? Going through this together.
and my son.
Okay, your
Be-
son is born at this point. We didn't
my
talk about
son
that.
was born in 2007.
Okay.
So he was a little kid when we were in California, and he
Yep.
was, um, one of the deciding factors for my ex was my son said he wanted to go through conversion. And so she was like, that helped my ex decide she wanted to do it too. And so we
Okay.
decided to do it as a family.
Yep.
And so we took the intro to Jewish courses at a conservative shul. New shul is an independent shul, but the rabbi is a conservative. So our conversion was conservative, but it was independent minion.
So he was from the
But
Jewish Theological Seminary, but the shul itself was unaffiliated.
yes, it was unaffiliated. Yeah,
Right.
and
Right.
he was influenced more like by the Reconstruction Judaism, so it was a little more eclectic, a little more open. It was very interesting. It was very spiritual, but very open. As
Yeah,
intellectual
I was
space, but
converted
spiritual
also by,
space.
yeah, I was converted by someone from the same persuasion. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean,
Mhm.
it was interesting. I mean, it worked. And then after our conversion, I got to finally have my Jewish wedding. Well, one of the things, like, so in the conversion, one of my favorite memories was going to the mikveh with my son to complete our conversion. Being able to do that with my son is just it's a moment I always cherish. It's a beautiful
Oh, yeah,
thing.
that must have been amazing. Yeah.
It was, and to have that with my son is a beautiful thing. Um, and then we ended up getting married and having a Jewish wedding that I wanted in the first place.
A
That didn't
real
save
Jewish
our
wedding.
marriage. That didn't save our marriage because it ended up not working out. But
Yeah, that's
I
unfortunate.
got
Yeah.
to have the Jewish wedding I wanted to have, and we're raising our kids Jewish, and that was what I had set out wanting to do. And I was finally in a space though where my mental health was a lot better.
Mm.
Um, and I was no longer holding on to like Jesus as anything.
So let's
I
let's talk about that for a minute. I know we've
yeah
gone kind of long here, but I
yeah
feel like this is a really, really healthy interview. So hopefully those who are watching this, maybe you can break it up into two parts or something. But what what point? Because I don't know that you can even pinpoint it, but maybe you can. So at some point during your journey, now obviously you've articulated very clearly how you always were attracted more to the Tanakh and always to the Hebraic perspective. It sounds like through the Brownsville thing, you got exposed kind of to the festivals. I know when I was associated with FFOZ, um, there was a number of individuals, and of course I was friends with all those guys, and I don't really have much relationship with them now. I'm still friends with Toby Janicki, but um, there was always this conversation about the different doorways that people enter the messianic space. One was through study of the text, study of the Torah. One was through the charismatic expression of trying to recapture the shofar and there was another door that was through the festivals. So people that started studying the biblical festivals and the biblical feasts, many people entered the messianic world through that door. But at one point for you, now you're speaking in glowing terms about your authentic Jewish conversion. And I can relate with this personally on a very emotional level. The highlight of my Jewish experience was the immersion in the kosher mikvah at the conversion ceremony. That was a deeply moving, emotional experience for my wife and I. And I don't care what anybody thinks about it. It was very real, and it was something that was very personal. And people can dismiss it if they want. I don't care. It doesn't matter because it meant a lot to me. I'm sure you feel the same way. Um, but there's a process, right, to where you get to that point. Like, how did you get from the messianic mindset where you were like, you got Jesus in your back pocket, but you're studying this Hebraic perspective, to where you were comfortable, which so many people are not comfortable doing this. Many people are afraid to let go of Jesus. But what point did you have in your journey where you were comfortable just kind of letting the Jesus concept just kind of float away on the water and just embrace your Jewish identity? How did that happen for you?
Um, well, I guess laying the scholarly foundational work, So
Yeah, right.
I had built a vast library. Oh my gosh, it was intense.
Same.
Of everything about Second Temple Judaism, the parting of the ways, first century Judaism, the ancient Near East. I done a lot of studying, just an intense library. I mean, I had Christian resources, Messianic resources. I started really picking up a lot of the historical critical, textual critical stuff. Bart Ehrman, James Tabor, Chaim Maccabee, Paul the
James is great.
Mythmaker.
I love James.
I really was getting to, and I had bought the entire, like, the Ante-Nicene Fathers, and just a lot of these early texts that we don't, one, they're not considered canon by most Christian organizations, but like this whole look at things and test it against itself kind of thing. So I was, the diversity of gospels in the new in the first, second, third, fourth century, more so than what we have. The echoes of the early Jewish Christianity. What I came to, like, and this was before I left. Like, I don't know what point I came to this in, but I was reading the Epistle of Peter to James and its reception. It talks about the receiving the traditions that came from the 70 elders and following the traditions according to Moses and the initiation into the tradition of Moses. And then it goes on to explain uh, um, um, mikvah, immersion in water, and a communal meal. And then in James's response, he's saying we only give this to men of the circumcision. And so you have to be circumcised. You have to go to a mikvah. And I'm like, whatever this is talking about is Jewish. It's not Christian. They were converting people to Judaism. So that, I mean, at some point, and I'm like, I don't remember at what point. When I was in the Messianic movement, because I had a blog, Paradox Parables, that at one point got up to 250,000 views a year. I used to have a Messianic Sitter app for doing liturgy on an Android and iPhone and stuff like that. I was in communication with, huh?
Yeah, I had the same thing. Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I had been in communication there with FFOZ, about their sitter and its production and stuff. But
Did
yeah,
they ever come out with it? Because it was like years.
yeah, they came out with a
I
few
was talking to
versions.
Aaron Eby at a conference one time, and I'm like, "You guys ever going to come out with it?" He just about hit his face. He was like, "It's a hard thing."
Yeah, yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. I remember I got early versions of that before it was fully out too.
yeah, yeah.
I you know I was at a place that there was this Jewish foundational thing
Mm-hmm.
before Christianity, and my involvement because when I was in Phoenix, we were part of like a Torah club thing, was, like, Christians need to know about the Jewish roots, but really, if a Christian, coming from a Christian, it's a different thing. It's not actually what it was. So
Yeah.
yeah, in the process of this getting back to the original thing,
Mm-hmm.
I finally get to a place where uh I just don't, but based on everything I read, I don't believe the New Testament. Based on my experience from when I was a child, all the questions I had, Bible college that I had, Messianic, like, the New Testament never became a thing that um didn't have holes. It always had holes for me. So
Mm-hmm.
it came to a place where I just um I didn't believe it to be a sacred text anymore, and I didn't believe it to be telling me the truth. Um and I didn't believe in Jesus. So, and that was before my conversion for sure.
I figured that. I appreciate you taking the time to kind of walk us through that, because
Yeah.
it's always right, isn't it? And I'm sure you experience this as well as I do. People are always shocked
Mm.
because you're taught as a Christian, especially as an evangelical, not so much as a Catholic, but you're taught as an evangelical Christian that once the old verse, right? I think it's in Thessalonians, that once you've tasted of the fruits of the Lord and then fall away, that or maybe it's in Peter, that it's like you're damned, like once you've tasted it and walk away, like that's a really bad place to be in. And people are always shocked when you tell them that, oh, I used to be, like I tell people, I used to be a pastor. I tell this story in my book, which I'm going to send you a copy of it, by the way, because you need to read it because it's so much like your story. Um, I was at a grocery store during the COVID event because my business slowed down because of all the lockdowns. So I took a job where my wife worked, and I was just stocking grocery shelves at Publix grocery store. And I had recently converted, so I was like fresh out of my conversion. So I was working. I had my zit seat, I had a kippah, um, and constantly having conversations in the store with people like, oh, wow, he's a Jew, right? Because he identifies as a Jew. And I had this guy that came up to me, and he was this radical dude, right? He was like this older guy. He had long white hair. He had a cowboy hat, long white beard. And anyways, he walks up behind me. I'm standing on a ladder, stocking shelves in the top row. And he's like, Shalom. And I just kind of turned and I said, Shalom. And he's smiling at me, and he's like, you're Jewish. I'm like, yeah. He says, do you know your Messiah? Because I'm in the Bible Belt, right? And I knew where he was going, and I just smiled at him. I didn't really want to have a scene. I didn't want to get into a thing with him, but I just smiled at him. I'm like, yeah, I just nodded, and I said, I just waited for him to talk, really. And he's like, do you know Jesus? And I said, I don't believe in Jesus. And so I was giving him an out, like, here I am, I'm openly Jewish. Like, the polite thing to do is to not press the issue, but this guy was not, he was, his eyes spinning in his head, right? And he's just like, well, that's because you haven't met him yet. And so I'm thinking to myself, and I describe this in the book, I'm like, do I go there? Do I really tell him? Or do I just let him think whatever he wants to think and keep doing my job? Because I'm on the clock, right? I'm feeling like this sense of obligation, like I'm being paid to work. I'm not being paid to talk about this stuff.
Mm.
And there's people around, and so, and he's being so insistent. And I said to him, I just told you I don't believe in Jesus. I said, I actually used to be a pastor. I was born again at one time when I was a young man. And he just literally, it was like somebody shot him in the chest. He just like backs up, and he gets this look of horror in his face. And he's like, how could you experience that and turn your back? He says, oh, I'll pray for you. I'll pray for you. And he walks away, and he wouldn't talk to me anymore. And I was like, I was just trying to be friendly.
Mm.
And it's like when you experience that and you realize the brainwashing, right? And then you get involved in the Jewish community, and it's so different than that. You don't have that level of like this, like you mentioned, this dichotomy of heaven and hell and good and evil. It's just, um, so anyways, I didn't mean to take the floor, but I just really relate with what you're talking about. Like you go through this experience, and now you feel, of course, unfortunately, you lost your marriage, but now, how would you describe today? Like, is your son still interested in Jewish studies, or has it waned, or like how does that work for you guys?
Um,
Kind of
so
jumping around.
divorces are complicated, and
Yeah, right.
um, Judaism is still a part of our family life. Um, my kids are here. We do Shabbat. We do the festivals. They were here for Rosh Hashanah. Um, they're going to be here for Simchat Torah on Friday.
Yep.
So Judaism is still part of our life. I have a teenage son, so maybe it had more meaning to him when he was younger than it does now.
Sure, that's normal.
But
That's yeah.
but My son, his values are still influenced by, the Torah and Judaism and being Jewish. Being Jewish is part of his life. He has to go back to a family that's mixed. His mom's become non-observant, and her extended family are hardcore Christian. So
Yeah.
they've had to make the choice of being Jewish and defining themselves as such. But I mean, it's still meaningful to us.
Sure. Yeah.
But
No, I know my 16-year-old daughter was shocked one day when she was still in, 'cause she's doing online school now. She's going to be going to trade school. But when she was in high school still, I think when she was a freshman, they did a study of the Holocaust in her school, and we had converted like maybe a year before that, and her teacher, at one point when they were asking people where they were coming from, they were trying to be very inclusive. This is the Bible Belt. Most people here are Christians, evangelical, and but we have a mixed community here. We have a lot of foreigners here. We have a lot of Buddhists. We have a lot of Muslims. So it's a very egalitarian culture here now because of all the growth. And anyway, she was asked her perspective as a young woman who was Jewish on the Holocaust, and she was mortified. Like she came home like so stressed because all of a sudden it hit home for her. Oh my gosh, I'm Jewish. Like this is something I have to come to terms with because she wasn't raised like that. You know, so there's a lot of paradigm shifts you go through, but yeah. So I can totally understand what you're saying, and like my daughters now who went through that with us. My oldest daughter is agnostic now. My son-in-law, who was married to her, that they were going to convert, but then decided not to. I have an oldest son who's a pastor, a Calvinist pastor up in Vermont. He refuses to read my book, but we have a great relationship, thankfully. And his wife does not want us to influence her children, however. And then we have my 21-year-old daughter who is non-religious completely. She has no interest in any religion at all. My 29-year-old son wants nothing to do with religion. And my 16-year-old now, she's very thankful that she went through the Jewish thing with us because it gave her tremendous perspective and open mind. And that's the thing that I'm most thankful for from our conversion was that it allowed my children to unplug from a dogmatic mindset and be able to look at. And that's one of the reasons, like you and I both share our affinity for the conservative movement, because there's a lot more intellectual diversity that's allowed. You're allowed to explore critical scholarship. You're not considered a heretic. And that's kind of where I was going with this as we start to round the bend here. And I don't want to cut you short in any way, but I'd like you to talk about how you became attracted more. Of course, you converted to the conservative movement, as you've already described. But what is it about the intellectual tradition that attracts you? And also, as an aside to that, my question for you would be, how has your study of critical scholarship related to the Tanakh impacted your faith in any kind of tangible ways?
Very good one. So I very much appreciate critical scholarship, and the fact that critical scholarship doesn't challenge leaders in the conservative movement in the way that some others do. I mean, my rabbi has openly talked about the document hypothesis and when certain parts of the Chumash were written, the cultural context of it, of the different sources. This like certain portions written during the Elohist or the Yahwist, the Deuterist, or the priestly sources, whatever. I mean, it's nice to be in a space where these things are openly talked about and actually used as the method of explaining this thing versus this is exactly how it came down from Mount Sinai. So, I like the intellectual rigor where we can embrace critical scholarship, that this is a cultural document built within the ancient Near Eastern culture. And the Sumerian and Akkadian myths may have played into the building of this folkloric hero. I would say that yes, there's probably a historical Abraham and Moses, but these are folkloric heroes. I mean, um, the it's nice to be within a tradition where we can say, hey, this is probably folkloric heroes, but this is also the Jewish tradition and Jewish culture, and it's best understood within the Jewish tradition and culture. When you take the Tanakh and you look at it with through the lens of the document hypothesis, well, the Chumash specifically, um, and then you look at the cultural underpinnings and what may have made the text, and you have people who are willing to look at it and say, well, our faith isn't diminished because humans created this document and it came from a people and a tradition.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that, I mean, I love the story of Abraham, like the story, not the biblical one, but Abraham and Ur of Chaldea. Basically, it's on the trading routes up there in, would be Iraq. And, the Tanakh is essentially a suzerainty treaty
Yep.
between a vassal and his client state. And so the Tanakh is the vassal, the king is Hashem, the Almighty God. Well, the contracts that they wrote in the trade route, Akkadian, they have these vases, and they would write on top of the vases in clay the cuneiform tablets, the little check marks. And the first like writing we have is Akkadian, which are these covenants, the contracts between, shipping and receiving of products from one place to another. They enter into a covenant or a contract. Well, this idea of covenant is the foundation for what becomes the covenant, that is handed down to Moses, right? We have the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Legends of Summer and this stuff, and they have similar flood and creation stories. Now, all of this stuff feeds into, and I like being in a tradition where we can say, hey, these people probably existed, but what we have in the Torah is legendary and mythological, but based on actual people. I like the study of the ancient Near East, and I like, and I even like the benefit of the Talmud is giving us the cultural understanding of what this text meant and the debates about it. But I look at it totally secular. I don't look at, when it's funny when I am hypercritical of the New Testament and people are like, well, but your scripture, and I'm like, I subscribe to the document hypothesis. I don't subscribe to the inerrancy of the Torah or something like
right.
They create this straw man argument like, oh, you're a Jew and you're having this debate. So, by the way, God screwed up with the Tanakh as well. And you're like, well, it's a human document. Yes.
Right. Hey, you're not Rabbi
what conversation are we having? Because you want to have the conversation that you would have if you asked me a question, or the one where you assume things.
Right.
I do believe in God, and I believe that the Torah and the Tanakh does represent the Jewish tradition and the Jewish people, and it's best understood that way. And the Western world has been changed by the ethics of the Tanakh, so it's a very valuable document. But do I believe that the Chumash, I keep saying Chumash, the Torah, the first 5 books, is the literal words of God handed to Moses on Mount Sinai? No.
Right.
But I believe that there is something, back to what I said at the beginning about spirituality and what I believe, that there's the divine spark, the Netzotze Elohim, and the Klipot, the husk that covers things. I feel that Judaism gets closest to right, but I don't feel like anybody is perfect and always right. In my view, in summation, for me, it's the closest in what works for me and my family. But at the same time, I'm non-dogmatic about that point. Like, it's okay if people disagree and find morality and whatever. Yeah, go ahead.
So let's wrap things up. This has been a really enjoyable time. I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to get to know you better, and hopefully that the audience feels the same. And you have this project that you're doing, Pulling the Thread podcast. You have it on Spotify. You have it on, I think you're still on YouTube, right? Or you're off YouTube now?
No, I'm on YouTube and
Okay.
everywhere you can podcast. I mean, they listen to podcast. It's everywhere. Yeah.
So, wh- have you been enjoying this process, and what are you hoping to do with it, and what are you hoping to accomplish with it?
I have been enjoying the process. Um, and like I was getting messages from a guy today on Messenger about how it's been beneficial for his journey, going through something similar like you and myself, and like the entire Messianic congregation that converted to Judaism that I had on recently.
Yeah, that was
Um,
fascinating. Yeah,
yeah. So I mean, I'm finding it beneficial, yes, and the conversations, the information, and some of the interesting people that I'm going to have on the future up here. I look forward to having conversations with people who their works have influenced like why I do what I do.
yeah. I'm
Um,
hoping to introduce you to a few people too.
yeah. So I'm enjoying it. I My publication schedule could probably be more consistently, but between work, being a father, and all the
I
other
get it.
things I
Yeah.
have, I do have a bunch of stuff planned out. And yeah, I look forward to keeping going with this and continuing to
Well,
produce
I think you're doing
content
a
that
great
people
job.
are
Yeah.
finding benefit from. Yeah.
I think your articles are excellent. I think you really put a lot of effort into it. I think they're well thought out, and I encourage people to. I've tried to share some of the things that you've put out. I haven't shared as much as probably I should, but I take some risks owning a business here in the Bible Belt when I put stuff out there that anything that criticizes mainstream
Yeah.
Christianity sometimes gets some blowback. But at this point, I'm 55 years old, and if people are going to judge me based on that, then I don't really need them in my life, so I'm not really worried about it. But I think you're doing a fantastic job and a fantastic service. Uh, I used to be in this space. I used to have a very active YouTube channel. I had about 900 subscribers at one point, which is very modest, but it was. I started getting some blowback from some of the nastier elements of the atheistic crowd that just I don't know, very temperamental, and I just didn't want to deal with the drama. And I'm busy building my business and trying to take care of my family. And what you're doing, I think, is great. And I just want to encourage anyone that's watching this to just continue learning. I'm sure you feel the same. Any last thoughts you have before we sign off?
No, thanks for doing this, and yeah, I hope that this was beneficial. It's kind of fun
Yeah,
doing it in reverse and being
yeah, it's been
asked
interesting,
questions.
hasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, so hopefully we'll have more conversations, and like I said, when we get off the air, I have a couple things I want to share with you, but if you have time, but I've had fun doing this, and I'm glad we finally connected.
All right, yeah, that sounds good. And yeah, we can do this again sometime. And yeah, thanks for tuning in. And make sure you guys follow on the YouTube, join the Facebook group, follow it, Jesus the Jew within Judaism.com. And make sure you guys plug in and like and subscribe.